Persona 3 is one of the most important games I have ever played. It conveys the most important lesson one can learn in life better than any other piece of art I've ever experienced. The best thing a video game can do is have its gameplay work in tandem with its story to enhance the overall experience, and Persona 3 does this in a way that feels absolutely ingenious, only for it to all culminate in one of the greatest endings to any video game I've ever seen. There is no other game or story quite like Persona 3 because it conveys its message in a way that only a Persona game can. If you don't play Persona 3, you are missing out. And yet the act of playing Persona 3 is precisely the problem. The gameplay is repetitive, and the story is terribly paced with a lot of major plot holes. I've heard from many fans that Persona 3 has a better story than Persona 5 with worse gameplay, and while the best parts of Persona 3's narrative surpass the heights of Persona 5, overall Persona 5 is superior in almost every single way. When people say Persona 3 has the better story, what they really mean is it has better characters and a powerful ending. The actual plot is much worse. This might be the hardest critique of a video game I've ever made, because I've never been this conflicted about a game before. At its best, Persona 3 is the best that games can be, yet the majority of the experience is so largely flawed that I have to acknowledge it's the worst Persona game between 3, 4, and 5. In other words, the highs are as high as Tartarus, while the lows are as low as Mementos. If you think I'm being too harsh in my criticisms, then I'll ask you this. If the original Persona 3 never came out, and this remake came out as Persona 6, then would it have received as much critical and fan praise? To me, it's obvious that this game being a remake of a beloved classic is inflating its positive reception. Of course, there's another larger reason as to why Persona 3 Reload is so well received despite its many shortcomings, which is because Persona has the best gameplay loop of any game ever, and I really mean it. To anyone who doesn't know Persona, here's a basic summary. Persona is a game where you play as a high school student who is balancing having a ton of deep friendships with studying for tests and grinding up social status so that you can become more attractive to the women you want to bang, all the while you secretly have superpowers and go out at night to kill monsters called shadows in an attempt to save the world. I know that's a lot to take in. It might not fully make sense right away. The superpowers are called personas, and while most people only get a single persona, the main character has the ability to capture and switch between personas during combat. You can also fuse two personas together to make something even stronger, which is like a Pokemon crafting system. Another way to explain Persona is that it's a Pokemon dating simulator where you collect demonic JoJo stands. The dating being between the humans, of course, get your head out of the gutter. In Persona, every activity takes up an afternoon or evening time slot, and you have a limited amount of days you can spend in the game, which means you have to think carefully about time management. You could study to increase your academics for the upcoming exam, or you could hang out with a friend who's struggling with his life problems. Every action benefits another part of the game, so you always have something to look forward to. If you deepen your friendships with others, you'll be able to fuse stronger personas for combat. If you grind up your social stats of charm, courage, and academics, then you'll be able to date more women, and also unlock more social links so that you can create stronger personas. Persona is all about min-maxing time management so you can make your character's life the best it can be while you rot away in real life playing an RPG for almost 100 hours, and I absolutely love it. Persona has my favorite gameplay loop of any game ever because it combines all my favorite entertainment into one package: battle anime, slice of life anime, and video games. Even when Persona isn't being done expertly well, I still love it because no other game offers an experience quite like Persona. One thing that Persona 3 does better than 5 is the social links, which are the mini storylines you go on with each friend you make. This is partially because every social link is now fully voiced, which is amazing and a must-have for Persona 6, but it's mostly because of the powerful writing. The theme of Persona 5 is righting the wrongs of a corrupt society through being a superhero. Some people say the adults are bad theme of Persona 5 is childish and worse than the themes of Persona 3 and 4, but I disagree. The theme of Persona 5 is amazing and socially relevant because it's true. A bunch of rich adults in many countries are narcissistic psychopaths who abuse their power, and it would take vigilantes to stop them. Although this theme enhanced the main story for me, it did take away from the social links. Many of Persona 5's social links culminate with you fixing your friends' lives with superpowers. While this fits the theme of Persona 5, it doesn't hit as hard as the social links in Persona 3. The theme of Persona 3 is about trying to find one's purpose in life while dealing with death and loss, so most of the social links are centered around this theme. Unlike Persona 5, you can't just fix these situations with your superpowers. All you can do is be a friend to those in need. This makes the social links in Persona 3 feel more like real life, since you can't just use superpowers to magic the cancer away or repair a failing marriage. Something that makes the social links even more interesting is how every character is experiencing a different type of loss at a different stage in life. For example, there's the grade schooler Maiko, whose parents are getting a divorce. Your job isn't to help fix their marriage, but to help Maiko realize that her parents' divorce isn't her fault and that she needs to accept things that she can't change. On the flip side, another one of my favorite social links is the divorced alcoholic Buddhist monk Matatsu, who chills at the club. This is a man who's experienced the same loss as Maiko, but from a different role and at a different age. Through talking to the main character Makoto, Matatsu is able to realize that leaving his family for a Buddhist temple and alcohol was a mistake, and that what he truly wants is to mend his broken relationship with his wife and son. Another great social link is Kamiki, who is a young man dying of a hereditary disorder. Makoto can't save his life, but he can be a friend to Kamiki as he tries to find purpose in his seemingly meaningless existence that is shortly coming to an end. Of course, like any other Persona game, there are definitely a few boring social links, with Fuka taking the cake as one of the worst ones. Her social link is about trying to increase her confidence through cooking, and then she wants to sleep with Makoto towards the end of it. That's it. The social links in every Persona game are hit or miss, but in Persona 3 when they do hit, they hit different. Some of these social links are genuinely impactful and will have you questioning what it means to live. In many ways, Persona 3 is like the Majora's Mask of Persona. Of course, there is no silly moon crashing into Earth in Persona 3, but there is a looming threat of the apocalypse in both games, and many of the characters you talk to in both games are at different stages of dealing with death and grief. Unfortunately, this comparison stops working when you compare the dungeon design between both games, because Majora's Mask has some of the best Zelda dungeons in the series, while Persona 3 has a very mediocre dungeon in the form of Tartarus, and it's the only dungeon in the entire game. This dungeon is one ginormous tower that you periodically ascend throughout the game. Every floor is randomly generated, and there are 6 different blocks which each offer a unique design. To state some positives, I liked the environmental design of every block of Tartarus, and the ominous vibe of Tartarus is pretty cool. Now for the negatives. Once you've seen one floor of a block, you've seen them all. The randomly generated tile sets are extremely repetitive, making every floor look the same as every other one. Since every floor is random, there are infinite floors, but in reality, it feels like you're doing the same floor 30 to 40 times. Just about any indie roguelike game I've played has more interesting randomly generated floors than this. The enemy variety also isn't very good. About halfway through each block, I just start seeing repeat enemies in every encounter, and many of the new enemies in the later blocks are just reskinned enemies from previous floors with their weaknesses and resistances swapped. There are also boss floors, but they're usually just buffed up versions of normal enemies you've already fought. Many of my biggest issues with Persona 3 are baked into the game's structure and difficult to improve for a remake, but Tartarus could have been greatly improved. It's a randomly generated dungeon that is completely separate from the main story for most of the game, so there's no reason for it to feel so repetitive. To be fair, the randomly generated Persona 5 dungeon Mementos wasn't all that great either, but at least it had some stories tied to it in the form of side quests, and it didn't take too much time because the main focus of Persona 5 were the handcrafted palaces. Since Tartarus is the only Persona 3 dungeon and where the vast majority of the gameplay takes place, it needed to be better. There could have been some special rooms with a unique puzzle that opens the way to a mini-boss and it gives you some special treasure. It may annoy some people, but maybe they could have had some requests with story content that is solved in Tartarus, kind of like how requests are handled in Persona 5. Of course, I'm not saying that these requests should be tied to social links, just some new side quest content. If this is all too much to ask, at the very least the random tile sets could have been more varied in each block so every floor doesn't feel the same. Instead of one block only being winding paths and another being open spaces, they could have mixed the different types of tiles within a single block's environment. The biggest silver lining to Tartarus is that even though it's extremely repetitive, at least the combat UI is flashy and gives me some dopamine. Although combat is as visually stimulating as ever, it's definitely worse than Persona 5 because the balancing is all off. In Persona 3's original release, you couldn't control your party members in battle, and you couldn't get extra buffs through hanging out with party members in the dorm. It feels like Persona 3 Reload is still balanced around the original's limitations, which makes hard mode feel like Persona 5 easy mode. One element I enjoyed about Persona 5 was killing every enemy with the least amount of SP, so that I could clear as much of the dungeon as possible to min-max my night slots. This isn't any fun in Persona 3 because it's too easy to clear a month of floors in a night or two. Healing doesn't cost much SP, and once you hang out with Yukari enough in her dorm, her healing will only cost a quarter of the normal SP, which should probably be nerfed in a patch. At most, it should be reduced to half. Typically, Persona combat is about locating enemy weaknesses. Every time you hit an enemy weakness, you get another turn to attack, and if all enemy weaknesses are hit, then you get to deal extra damage in the form of an all-out attack. Persona 3 Reload got so easy that I stopped having to interact with the game's central mechanic of finding weaknesses, and found it easier to just unload physical damage in every fight. In other Persona games, this is less of a good idea since physical attacks cost the user's health, but with healing being so cheap, it was an easy strat to break almost every encounter. The fact that the game's best strategy is also the most brain-dead further led to combat in Tartarus becoming mind-numbing. Because the game is so visually stimulating, Tartarus makes me feel like I'm a hamster running on a dopamine wheel, with every hit being weaker and weaker until my mind goes completely numb. Persona 3 took me a little under 80 hours to beat, and somewhere between 25 to 30 of those hours were spent in Tartarus, which means about a third of the game and most of the gameplay is somewhat mediocre. Although Persona 5 has much better combat from a balancing mechanics perspective, every Persona game does two things really stupid. The first is that you can't reload a save while in battle, and the second is that when the main character gets knocked out, you can't revive them and automatically get a game over. Not being able to load a save mid-combat means that you either have to relaunch the game or wait for the main character to die, both of which is a stupid waste of time. Persona games are already too long, and they surely don't need to artificially increase their playtime longer. Similarly, losing when the main character gets knocked out is artificial difficulty to make you waste more time. I'd prefer a harder game where all the deaths are my fault as opposed to an easier game where some bad RNG sends me to a lose screen for no reason. A counter-argument for this is that there's a story reason for why you get a game over when Makoto dies, but that argument doesn't make any sense because no one ever dies when they reach 0 HP, they just get knocked out. The only reason why Makoto dies when you reach 0 HP is because artificial difficulty and they want to waste your time. Although I think this is stupid, I will say this issue didn't come up much in Persona 3 Reload because the game is way too easy, which is another issue. Although the combat has issues and Tartarus is boring, neither of these are my biggest issue with Persona 3. To understand that, we have to look at the structure of the game's plot. When I play a game I plan to critique, I will take notes on the game's various elements, and for the first 30 hours of Persona 3, my notes for the story section had one bullet point. A third of the game had passed, yet only one thing important enough to write down had occurred, and that thing was just plot exposition. Outside of plot exposition, there were character introductions, and that's about it. Compare this to Persona 5, where I could write a mini-essay about the second dungeon Madarame's villain who became rich by stealing his pupil's artwork, and you should be able to see the biggest issue with Persona 3. It's a lengthy RPG without any mini-story arcs to fill out its long runtime. Although Persona 3 invented the time management gameplay loop and social links that the series is so loved for now, it was Persona 4 that invented the Persona formula of introducing a new dungeon each month with a new character who has to overcome a great conflict. Persona 3 without the Answer DLC is shorter than Persona 4 and 5, yet it does the least to justify its length. Furthermore, not having any mini story arcs makes Persona 3's other giant flaw, Tartarus, even worse. When you explore this randomly generated dungeon, there is no goal, there's no reason. Sure, people will wander into Tartarus and get lost, and sometimes these characters will wind up on the 200th floor for some reason, but the lost people in Tartarus will never have any stories attached to them outside of a single full moon event. Sure, Persona 4 dungeons were also randomly generated and not at all on the level of Persona 5 palaces, but at least there was a clear goal you were pursuing in every dungeon. In Persona 3, Tartarus feels like a job. It feels like work that you do at the end of every month just so that you're strong enough for the next full moon. Speaking of full moons, instead of mini story arcs, Persona 3 has full moon events, and they're a lot worse. They happen once a month during each full moon, and typically all you do is kill a boss shadow and maybe have a tiny cutscene. Sometimes you'll wander into a little bit of a dungeon or see some plot build up with the villains that doesn't go anywhere usually, and that's about it. The full moon with the most missed potential has to be Fuka's. Fuka is being bullied by her classmates, and then both her and her classmates begin to disappear. In order for this story to work, it'd make more sense if you met Fuka before her disappearance, but no. You just hear about her through gossip, and then Yukari has some stupid arc about investigating ghost stories because people are disappearing, and it makes Junpei think that there might be ghosts. And then during the full moon event, you meet Fuka for the first time as you save her, and then her bully apologizes to her. The issue is that a mini story arc doesn't work if you meet the character on the day of the final mission without any build-up. If Fuka was placed into Persona 4 or 5, they would have done this plot justice, but in Persona 3 it just falls flat. It takes 7 in-game months to get to the first big emotional moment in the plot, which is over the 40-hour mark. After that, there's quite a lot of plot holes, and then all the good plot moments are concentrated into the final 3 months of the game. The issue with Persona 3's plot is that it's paced like a giant movie that is spread out over 80 hours, while Persona 4 and 5 are anime TV shows with tons of mini-arcs that give real payoff throughout the course of their 100-hour runs. Because of this, over 40 hours of Persona 3 is just the rising action of the movie and exposition with no real payoff for any of the plot points. Meanwhile, if you were to put 40 hours into Persona 5, you'd get a ton of memorable experiences from just that. In Persona 5, a villain is introduced right away in the form of Kamoshida, and within around 10 hours of meeting him, there is a good resolution for his plot, while in Persona 3, there is no clear villain introduced until around the 30-hour mark, and there's no good resolution with him until the end of the game. The superior dungeons and mini-arcs of Persona 5 made that game feel more like an adventure. I'd go on adventures with my friends through a castle, a museum, a casino, and more, where I'd solve puzzles, defeat bosses, and overcome the narcissistic villains who were trying to destroy our lives. In Persona 3, the Tartarus gameplay doesn't help make the game feel like a wild adventure. It just feels like a chore I have to do to grind XP for the next full moon, and that really takes something away from the Persona experience. To finish this section covering the issues with Persona 3, I'll mention one more thing: performance. It's usually good, but for some reason the FPS would always drop in the mall, even though I turned off reflections in the settings and I have a good computer. Also, for a game that doesn't have nearly as many locations as Persona 5, I found the nightclub to be especially lazy. All the people are super low poly and they don't even have animations for dancing. It would be better if there were less people who actually had animations to make this place feel more alive. Believe it or not, I actually quite like Persona 3, and I've been negative for a while, so let's talk about something this game nails: the music. These games have my favorite soundtracks of anything ever, which is why I shove the music in all of my videos even when it's tonally inconsistent with the video's content. There's rock, rap, pop, jazz, and a little classical thrown in there, and my god, the OP is a masterpiece. I know people miss Burn My Dread, but Full Moon Full Life perfectly captures the spirit of Persona 3 in a really good song. The feelings of hope and hopelessness, love and loss, it's all there. This is hands down my new favorite Persona OP. Does anyone else look forward to a new Persona game for the music, like a new album release, maybe as much as you look forward to it as a game? Another thing I love about Persona 3 are the characters. Aiga steals the show as the best character.
Usually, people's asses are already cracked. Yours is as well, right?
Elizabeth is by far the best Velvet Room assistant.
Flowing stairs that pose an obstacle to those who dare to reach another floor. So, this is an escalator.
Junpei is a bro character who has an actual character arc, and Yukari is a tsundere who has a reason for being mean to everyone. Yukari's dad died at a young age, and her mom jumped into a bunch of relationships with different men, so Yukari distanced herself from her mom, leaving her completely alone. Her default is to push everyone away because of her abandonment issues. Also, I really liked all of the English voice actors. Many fans were upset that they cast new English voice actors for the remake, and while I understand missing the emotional attachment you had to the original voices, I still think the new voices all do a good job. So Persona 3 has my favorite cast of characters of any Persona game, but what about the main story? Is it as good as it's been praised to be, or is it overrated? My answer is yes to everything, depending on what part of the story you're looking at. If that doesn't make any sense, then you're just gonna have to watch this story analysis to understand why. Let's start this analysis at the beginning. You play as Makoto Yuki, a second-year transfer student at Gekkokan High School who arrives at the dorms around midnight. You step off of the train to see a disturbing sight. The ground is covered in blood, and coffins line the streets. Once you make it to the dorm, you are approached by a young boy who asks you to sign a contract. You sign this contract, only for the boy afterwards to fade into blackness. Immediately after the child leaves, a woman appears right behind him. She seems suspicious of you and reaches for her gun, before she is stopped by the student council president Mitsuru Kurijo. Mitsuru says that the girl who almost pulled out a gun is Yukari, and explains to Yukari that you are a late-minute transfer student and not someone that she should be afraid of. Yukari walks you to your room and asks if anything weird happened on your way from the station, and for some reason you can't ask about the blood and coffins. You could assume this is because Makoto doesn't believe his own eyes and doesn't want Yukari to think that he's crazy, but I still think there should have been a dialogue option. The next day you walk to school with Yukari, which causes Junpei to think that you guys are dating. Junpei is the extroverted bro anime character who gets shit on all the time, but as we'll see later, he has more going on than the male side characters of Persona 4 and 5. Yukari shoots Junpei down and says there's nothing between you guys, but of course I'm going to change that by the end of the game. During one night of sleep, you wake up in the Velvet Room and meet the long-nosed man himself, Igor, and his assistant Elizabeth. Igor explains that the Velvet Room exists between dream and reality, and that you're only able to enter because you signed the contract that the strange boy presented you with in the beginning of the game. Igor gives you the power to wield multiple persona, as well as the ability to fuse personas together. The night after your conversation with Igor, the full moon comes and an extra strong shadow attacks the dorms. There's another male Persona user at the dorms named Akihiko Sanada, who's also a boxer that's supposed to fight the shadow. So Yukari comes to your room and tells you that you guys should just run away. In the hallway, you both hear a loud noise, which makes Yukari think that the shadow got inside. You run to the roof to escape, only to realize that the shadow wasn't inside, but was actually climbing the walls and is now right in front of you. Although Yukari has never unlocked her persona before, she attempts to do so right now by pointing a gun at her head, which is called an evoker. Unfortunately, she can't bring herself to do it in time, and the shadow knocks her down. Seeing this happen, Makoto picks up the evoker and shoots himself instead, despite not knowing what an evoker is. He even knows to say persona before shooting himself, and then he starts smiling wickedly. At first I thought this was Makoto's cry for help, since he looked like he tried to end his life. But Makoto knowing to do this makes sense within the game's world. Persona's magic system is based off of Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, so you can just assume that all the main characters are naturally submerged in the collective unconscious and have intuitive knowledge about some things that they've never heard of. Fun fact, canonically Carl Jung was a Persona user in the series lore, and so was Hitler. Anyways, after you use your evoker to unlock your persona, it anime transforms into an extremely strong persona that murders the boss Shadow in a single hit. The reasoning as to why this transformation occurs won't be explained for a long time, so try to remember. A few days later, Mitsuru and the director of Gekkokan High School, Ikutsuki, hold a meeting where they explain what's been going on at night. Every midnight, time freezes for 1 hour in what is called the Dark Hour. In that time, humans turn into coffins, blood covers the ground, and shadows roam the earth. However, some people don't turn into coffins during this time, and a small portion of these people have the ability to unlock their persona. A persona is a manifestation of the user's personality that gives them powerful abilities, while shadows are manifestations of people's negative emotions that have gotten out of control. You can think of combat in Persona like if you stepped inside of the collective unconscious of mankind and killed the negativity with your personality that expresses itself with superpowers. Back to the plot, Ikutsuki explains that all the students at the dorms have personas and are part of the Specialized Extracurricular Execution Squad, or SEAS for short. It's SEA's job to eliminate the shadows and save humanity from apathy syndrome, which is a recent phenomenon where shadows will feed on the minds of humans until they succumb to depression and become a living corpse. The next day, Junpei, the guy you met in school earlier, joins the dorms because he turns out to have the potential to become a Persona user. Ikutsuki ends up holding another meeting with the new member where he explains that defeating shadows isn't enough to actually destroy the Dark Hour and stop apathy syndrome. In order to do that, you'll need to find the answers in Tartarus. During every Dark Hour, Gekkokan High School turns into a giant tower called Tartarus, which acts as a nest for shadows. As I explained previously, I don't like Tartarus from a gameplay point of view, but from a story perspective, I also see a lot of missed potential in Tartarus. The idea of Persona 3 is that at night the world changes and shadows lurk around every corner. Yet outside of the full moon missions, you're never allowed to freely explore the world during the Dark Hour. It would be so cool if you could freely explore places that you see during the day in more depth during the Dark Hour, and maybe some of the buildings could turn into enterable dungeons. There's a lot of potential in a dark world concept, yet it's completely wasted when all you do for 90+% of the game is explore a single randomly generated dungeon. You end up exploring Tartarus with Junpei and Yukari, who both awaken to their personas during the mission. And then after your first excursion into Tartarus, the plot just kind of stops moving. You go to school, do social links, explore randomly generated dungeon, and every time there's a full moon, you have to kill a new boss shadow. 1 week before every full moon, the strange boy who asked you to sign the contract visits you and tells you that the end is nigh. The boy mentions that his name is Pharos, but beyond that, you don't get too many details about what he's talking about. Eventually, Fuka joins the group and becomes the navigator, but she isn't all that important to the plot, and her full moon event is disappointing, as explained earlier in the video. So now we're gonna skip from April to July for the next important plot event. Yukari has been suspecting Mitsuru of hiding something for quite some time, so at a SEAS meeting, Yukari asks Mitsuru to tell her the truth about why SEAS exists. As it turns out, Yukari's suspicions were correct, and Mitsuru reveals that she knows why the Dark Hour exists. Mitsuru comes from a very rich family who built Gekkokan High School. Her rich grandfather, Koetsu Kurijo, was obsessed with harnessing the power of the shadows, so he built a laboratory to experiment on them. Eventually, something went wrong and his laboratory blew up, killing everyone inside, including himself and Yukari's father, Eiichiro Takiba. Yukari's dad died because he was a scientist who worked on the shadow experiments with Koetsu Kurijo. The explosion caused 12 powerful shadows to be released, and these are the same shadows you've been fighting during every full moon. Also, the Dark Hour and Tartarus only exist because of this failed experiment. Tartarus formed over the remains of where the explosion originally happened. Gekkokan High School was built over the remains of the laboratory, which is why the school turns into Tartarus during the Dark Hour. The Kirijo group built the high school so that they could abduct some of the children and experiment on them to try to artificially awaken their personas. Their goal was to get a team of persona users who could clean up the Kirijo group's mess and kill the 12 full moon shadows. Unfortunately, most of the children died in the experiments. Yukari is upset that Mitsuru kept the truth behind her father's death and the shadow's existence a secret for so long, but Akutsuki provides a silver lining. He says that if Seize kills all of the 12 shadows that appear during every full moon, the Dark Hour will disappear with them. However, it's likely that when the Dark Hour disappears, the main character's persona abilities and memories of the Dark Hour will disappear alongside it. After the group learns that Mitsuru had been lying to them, morale is at an all-time low, which is why now is a perfect time for the anime beach episode. The group takes a vacation to Mitsuru's estate on Yakushima Island. During the beach trip, my favorite character in all of Persona is introduced, Aigis. It starts during a really funny scene where Junpei challenges Akihiko to see who's better at picking up women, and being the boxer he is, Akihiko can't back down from a challenge, so he takes him up on it. Then Akihiko and Junpei declare that picking up women is an operation, and the battle music starts playing, which makes everything way funnier. Makoto and the boys proceed to get brutally rejected by a bunch of women until Makoto talks to a blonde girl on the dock. The girl says, "Initiating evasive maneuver, confirmation must be made at a secure location." Then she proceeds to Naruto run into the forest. After you chase down the Naruto running girl in the woods, she immediately hugs Makoto. It turns out that the woman is actually a shadow-killing machine named Aigis who feels an inexplicable need to be at Makoto's side. Aigis suffered damage her first year in the field and went into hibernation in a Kirijo group laboratory underneath their estate on Yakushima Island. For some reason, the main characters arriving at the island caused Aigis to wake up, allowing her to join Seize. Soon after coming back to the dorms, Aigis enrolls in the same high school as everyone else, despite being a robot, because Akutsuki thinks it's a good idea. The plot kind of moves again at the next full moon when the villain finally confronts the main characters for the first time. The lack of a real villain in the first 4 in-game months of Persona 3 really hurts the start, but at least he's kinda cool once he gets there. Takaya, also known as Revolver Jesus, is the leader of Strega. The 2 other members of Strega are Jin and the Goth mommy Chidori. These 3 are the only living survivors of the Gekkokan High School experiments, where their personas were awakened artificially. Because of this, their personas are unstable and can murder them, so they have to take drugs to suppress their power. The only issue is that these drugs are also killing them. Knowing they don't have long to live, they choose to focus on living for the moment. There's some genuinely good dialogue between Takaya and the protagonist throughout the game where he argues morality from the perspective of a psychopath. Takaya learns that Seize is trying to eradicate the Dark Hour by killing the full moon shadows, which will get rid of their persona powers. Takaya thinks getting rid of their powers to save lives is pure stupidity. The way he sees it, natural disasters that kill many people are bound to happen, and the Dark Hour is a natural disaster that gives him superpowers, so why should they put an end to it? Humans are going to die either way, so why not let a few more die so that he can be a god among men? I enjoyed that Takaya isn't just a mustache-twirling villain and instead has some solid arguments in favor of being a psychopath. After all, deep down, the main characters don't want to lose their powers either, which is why Takaya's arguments are so enticing. Unfortunately, Takaya doesn't do much in his first confrontation with the main characters. He just seals you inside of a building with a shadow you were already planning to kill. Can you guess what happens after another full moon where little occurs beside character introductions? More character introductions. A child named Kenemata moves into the dorms because he has the potential to become a Persona user, and in August he joins Seize as a new member. Shortly after Ken joins, a delinquent named Shinjiro Aragaki joins Seize as well. Shinjiro was actually one of the original members of Seize alongside Mitsuru and the boxer Akihiko, but Shinjiro quit. During one of their operations, Shinjiro lost control of his persona and it killed an innocent woman. Ever since then, Shinjiro has been taking drugs to suppress the powers of his persona, but just like with Takaya, these drugs are slowly killing him. I just want to point out that we're about halfway through the game, 35 hours have passed, which is closer to 40 if we include deaths and rewinds, yet the entire plot recap has been character introductions and exposition. Just look at how long the plot analysis of the first half of the game is, and then look at how much more time is left in the video. Well, now we're in the second half of the game, so things are gonna really start happening, and it all starts when Junpei realizes the one thing he's missing in life: a goth girlfriend. Junpei starts talking to Chidori without knowing she's secretly allied with the villain Takaya. One day Junpei notices that Chidori is bleeding, and he thinks, I can fix her. The reason she's actually bleeding is because of her out-of-control persona powers, but Junpei doesn't know that. In order to get closer to the goth GF of his dreams, Junpei tries to impress Chidori by claiming to be the leader of Seas, even though the main character Makoto is the real leader. Since Chidori is actually a bad guy, she decides to use her persona's navigational powers to kidnap Junpei on the September full moon. Thinking Junpei has authority over Seas, Chidori asks him to call off the full moon operation. Since Junpei isn't the leader, we can easily eliminate the full moon shadow as always. Afterwards, the Seas navigator Fuka locates Chidori and Junpei at the top of the dorms. We confront Chidori and she prepares to attack us with her persona, but Junpei knocks her down before she can shoot. My complaints with this section of the story are as follows. Why did Chidori get no help from her allies Takaya and Jin? Why did Chidori hold Junpei hostage in the enemy's base of operations? And what was her plan if Junpei did call off the operation? Even without a navigator, Seas would have found her because she held Junpei at the dorms. So what was her plan afterwards? Was she going to fight 8 persona users at once? Maybe she'd have a slim chance with Takaya and Jin, but she went alone. Maybe she was trying to distract the main characters for about an hour, even if it cost her her life so that they wouldn't have time to kill the full moon shadow. However, even if that did work, I'm fairly certain the shadow would just spawn at the next full moon anyways, so her plan could never accomplish anything. The writing behind Chidori's plan may make absolutely no sense, but believe it or not, it isn't close to the worst part of Persona 3's story. Either way, with Chidori defeated, Ikutsuki places her in a hospital under watch as an unofficial prison of sorts. Over the next couple of months, Junpei will occasionally visit Chidori in the hospital, because he doesn't want to give up on the goth girlfriend of his dreams even though she betrayed him. I haven't given any spoiler warnings in this critique because so little happens in the first half of this game, but if you want to avoid major plot spoilers, I'd say now is when you'd want to leave. The plot moves again during the next full moon on October 4th. The child Ken and the delinquent Shinjiro are missing from the full moon operation and aren't able to help defeat the boss Shadow. Seas ends up defeating the Shadow without their help as always. Afterwards, Mitsuru remembers that October 4th is the anniversary of when Shinjiro's persona went berserk and murdered a woman, the woman in question being Ken's mother. Mitsuru thought that Ken didn't see who killed his mother, but he did, and the kid's been out for blood ever since. Ken asks Shinjiro to come to the back alleys so that he could murder him. Shinjiro accepts, knowing what Ken wants because he's already killing himself with the suppressant drugs, and on some level Shinjiro wants to die from the guilt. Before Ken can take his revenge, Takaya shows up and shoots Shinjiro. Takaya asks which member of Seas is the navigator who is locating the shadows during every full moon. Ken lies and says that he's the navigator. Ken does this because ever since he lost his mother, he's wanted to die, and he was originally planning to kill himself after murdering Shinjiro anyways. Takaya prepares to shoot the boy, however right as he pulls the trigger, Shinjiro jumps in the way to take the bullet. Takaya hears Seas closing in on him and decides to leave without killing the kid. Akihiko runs in and grabs a hold of the bloodied Shinjiro, but he's already too late. Shinjiro whispers, "This is how it should be," before fully letting go of his life. There's a lot to unpack here with this scene, both good and bad. To start with the good, I like the conflicting emotions Ken displays in reaction to Shinjiro's death. Ken hated Shinjiro for killing his mom when he lost control of his persona, but Shinjiro also died while protecting Ken, which further confused the boy about whether or not his hate was justified. I also liked how Akihiko reflected on Shinjiro's death. Akihiko realized that he was so blinded by his pursuit of power that he wasn't able to realize his friend was suffering to save him. After coming to this realization, Akihiko's voice actor lets out a great performance where the stoic character breaks down into tears. Now let's talk about the problems with this scene. The first tiny issue is that I'm not sure how Takaya found Shinjiro and Ken. I can't find any footage of this, but I'll just assume Takaya broke into the hospital undetected and had Chidori use her navigational powers to find the group, and saw that two of them were apart from the rest. However, this nitpick doesn't really matter because there is a second larger issue with this scene. So Takaya shoots Shinjiro, then puts the gun back in his waist strap, and despite Takaya still being a danger to Ken, Shinjiro doesn't think to use his evoker to summon his magical abilities. I guess Ken doesn't want to use his persona because he wants to die, but surely Shinjiro should use his powers to stop the villain instead of just taking a second bullet. You could say that Shinjiro doesn't want to use his persona in fear of losing control of it again, but he is taking drugs to suppress his persona, and you can have Shinjiro use his persona in Tartarus, so that can't be true. Furthermore, Shinjiro doesn't know that his friends are coming to save Ken, so Shinjiro could just take this bullet and then his friends arrive late and then Ken dies anyways. The best solution for Shinjiro, by far, is to use his evoker and use his magical powers to fight the bad guy, or at least try to stall to have Ken escape. It seems to me like the writers didn't want Shinjiro to use his powers because it would complicate the scene and make it harder to animate, even though he really should have. And this won't be the only time this issue happens. Then again, I could say that Takaya putting his gun away also doesn't make much sense, as it gives the enemies an opening that they just choose not to use. Unsurprisingly, the plot doesn't have any major developments until the next month's full moon. Seize is finally fighting the 12th and final full moon shadow. If they kill this final boss, then the dark hour will finally disappear. Takaya and Jin don't want to let this happen, so they confront the group on the bridge before the boss. Seize defeats Takaya, and the villains escape by jumping off of the bridge. Of course they don't die. I'll just assume this is because Persona users tend to be stronger than normal people, and maybe they can just take a fall that would kill a normal person. With Takaya and Jin gone, Seize is able to defeat the final boss Shadow and destroy the Dark Hour for good. With peace returned to the land, Seize holds one more victory celebration before disbanding. There, Mitsuru's father, Takiharu Kirijo, shows up to congratulate them. Takiharu never supported his father's twisted experiments on the Shadows, and he helped finance Seize to clean up his father's mess. Unfortunately for our main characters, this video isn't nearly over, so of course the Dark Hour still happens during the celebration. Surprised by this, Seize heads out to Tartarus to investigate, and what they see shocks them. Ikutsuki and the robot Aegis are standing there. Menacingly! Just like any good Persona game, the adults are evil. Ikutsuki has been lying to the main characters the whole time. Ikutsuki helped Koitsu Kirijo on the experiments that created the Dark Hour, and he reveals that the Dark Hour didn't come about by accident. The researchers were intentionally trying to bring about the fall of mankind through the experiments. Ikutsuki reveals that there is a prophecy that says the prince who brings about the fall of mankind will rule the new world as king. Okay, so what this scene tells us is that the reason for the entire plot happening is that Ikutsuki and Koitsu Kirijo believed in a prophecy that said they'd be rewarded if they ended humanity. This brings us to a very large question. Why would they believe that? In order for the writing of a villain to be good, the writers need to explore the question of why. They do this very well with Takaya. Takaya wants to let the Shadows murder humans. Why is that? Because if he erases the Shadows, there's a chance that he'll lose his powers and no longer be special. With that being said, why does Ikutsuki think the world is beyond salvation? Why does he think the world needs to start over? Why does he trust the prophecy when it says if he'll bring death to all, he'll be the single exception? The only answer to any of this is he's insane. Ikutsuki and Koitsu trying to bring about the fall through experiments is the reason for the entirety of Persona 3 happening, and the reason as to why the villains did any of this is because they are insane. This is a 70 to 80 hour RPG, and the motive behind the events that set in motion the entire plot isn't explained as anything but rich people crazy. And here I've heard Persona 3 fans say that Persona 5 has overly simplistic writing. And somehow it gets worse. After Ikutsuki reveals the entire plot happens because rich people crazy, he tells Aigis to capture the main characters. Then the screen fades to black, and the main characters wake up chained to crosses. I waited the entire game for this to be explained, and it never was. How in God's name did Aigis defeat 8 Persona users? There is absolutely no way. Aigis is a playable character, and she isn't even strong enough to 1v1 the main character Makoto, let alone all of C's. Let's just say theoretically that Aigis is always at 25% power, and that Ikutsuki activated her true power to capture C's. If this is true, then A, after Aigis becomes a good guy again, it would be our first priority to get her back to 100% power so that she can one-shot every boss. And B, even if she became 4 or more times stronger, I still think that C's would win. You could say that turn-based combat power doesn't translate one-to-one with cutscene power, and that Aigis captured them all because her hands are guns. But if it's really true that one person with guns is stronger than 8 Persona users, then what the hell is the point of this game anyways? Should we all just pull up Persona 5 and bring guns into Tartarus because they're stronger than our literal magic spirit powers? Isn't the first rule of anime and comic books that superpowers beat guns, or else you would just not use the superpowers and they would be irrelevant? And also on the note that gameplay doesn't translate to cutscene power, that goes both ways, because in gameplay we can only fight with 4 people at one time, but in a cutscene hypothetically Aigis would have to beat all 8 at the same time, so it's even more unrealistic in a cutscene that she could win. They don't even have the decency to make Aigis a boss that you can't win against. The screen literally fades to black and you wake up in chains. Did Aigis knock us all out? Did we all surrender? The scene's so illogical, the writers don't even have the decency to write what happens, because they probably don't know what happens either, because it's just a plot hole happens and they don't want to show it. And then the plot gets more stupid. Since there's no way that Aigis should be able to beat 8 Persona users, Ikutsuki's plan makes no sense. Was his master plan to have Aigis 1v8 everyone after they killed the final boss Shadow? That's an awful plan, and that only works because the writers shoved in a plot hole to get us to the cool scene where everyone's strung up on a cross. Anyways, after Aigis captures the party, we all wake up chained to crosses, and Mitsuru's father, Takiharu Kirijo, has been kidnapped. Ikutsuki orders Aigis to murder Takiharu, but she hesitates, which gives Takiharu time to pull out his gun and shoot Ikutsuki. Ikutsuki and Takiharu end up shooting each other at the same time. After getting shot, Ikutsuki orders Aigis to execute the sacrifices. Aigis looks towards her companions and remembers all the good times they had together, and she overrides her programming with the power of anime friendship. Even though she was ordered to murder her friends, she breaks their chains instead. With his plan foiled, Ikutsuki goes on one more crazy villain monologue before jumping off of the tower and plunging towards his death. Afterwards, Mitsuru's father bleeds out from the gunshot wound and dies as well. The next day, Fuka gives Yukari footage of her scientist father, Ichiro Takiba, who worked on the experiment that created the Dark Hour. As it turns out, Ichiro caused the laboratory to blow up so that he could separate the powerful shadow they created into multiple pieces. He says that if anyone were to kill the shadows, then they'd be able to return to their host and bring about the end of the world, which is exactly what the main characters have been doing this entire game. Later into the next month, Takaya and Jin return because they survive jumping off of the bridge, and they break Chidori out of the hospital. Chidori agrees to help Takaya because she's upset that Junpei brought pain and fear back into her life. Before, when Chidori didn't care about anything, she had nothing to fear. But because Junpei kept visiting her in the hospital, Chidori started to care about him. Since Chidori cares about Junpei, she has begun to fear losing him when she inevitably dies, which causes her pain. Chidori joins back with Takaya as a way to stop the pain that comes with having people you care about. Under Takaya's orders, Chidori attempts to solo kill C's, which isn't very smart, and it doesn't really work. Chidori collapses while she explains to Junpei how she's afraid of losing him, and then Takaya shows up. Junpei threatens Takaya and claims that he'll protect Chidori with his life, and then instead of pulling out his evoker, he looks away towards Chidori, giving Takaya time to shoot Junpei. More like Stupei, am I right? Junpei dies immediately, so Chidori uses her persona ability to revive him. Junpei comes back to life, but since he was fully dead rather than unconscious, Chidori dies to save him. Junpei has an emotional moment as Chidori dies where Takaya just watches and chooses not to shoot him again. With Chidori dead, for the first time ever in a cutscene, a character realizes they have magical superpowers and Junpei attacks Takaya with a fireball, causing Jin to jump in the way of the fire. He should have used the ability to deal damage to all enemies, I guess. For some inexplicable reason, all of Seas watches this happen and doesn't help Junpei attack Takaya. Even though canonically Aegis alone is strong enough to knock out all of Seas, she chooses not to shoot at Takaya. Seas proceeds to allow Jin and Takaya to get away. Wow, this cutscene was surprisingly bad and illogical from every point of view. Why didn't Takaya shoot Junpei again? Why didn't Seas attack Takaya even though he could have shot Chidori out of her revival? Why didn't Seas help Junpei after his revival so they could kill the villain? The answer is they want to save the Takaya and Jin boss battles for the end of the game, but they also want Chidori to die, so here's some plot holes. Well, that about covers the crappy part of Persona 3's plot, so now it's on to the good stuff, and it all starts with Gekkoukan High's new transfer student, Ryoji. If you've ever seen Evangelion, this is literally just the angel guy, but in Persona. Ryoji arrives right after the main characters kill the final boss Shadow, which is supposed to bring about the end times, and Aegis immediately recognizes Ryoji as dangerous. Despite it not being the best idea, the group starts hanging out with Ryoji anyways, and he turns out to be both a deep thinker and a bit childish at the same time. Ryoji hits on every girl he sees, and maybe even some guys, and he tries to steal a bunch of guys' girlfriends. Yet on the class trip when you hang out with him, he starts pondering a deep philosophical question as to why people try to connect with each other when they know they'll all die one day and have to say goodbye. Despite Ryoji not understanding why people reach out to each other, he still tells Makoto that the time they spend together feels precious to him. One day before the next full moon, Ryoji invites you over to the music room. Here he plays a pretty song and then says, "I know I wanted us to be friends, but I actually want to be something more." Then Fuka comes into the room and asks who was playing the piano, and you turn around to see that Ryoji had already vanished. He just confesses his love to you and vanishes into thin air, just like a real-life OnlyFans bot. Like always, the plot moves once again at the next full moon when Ryoji's identity is finally revealed. Aegis meets up with Ryoji on a bridge during the dark hour. Aegis's memory was damaged from combat 10 years ago, but through being around Ryoji, Aegis has finally been able to regain her lost memories before Ryoji even could. When the Kirijo laboratory blew up, the shadows didn't split into 12 parts, but 13, with each part representing a different major arcana tarot card. And unsurprisingly, Ryoji isn't a human, he's actually the 13th arcana, Death. 10 years ago, Aegis became damaged in her first battle because she fought with Death. Death and Aegis weakened each other during the fight, and before Death could fully kill Aegis, she managed to seal him inside of a little boy whose parents were killed in a car crash because of the fight. That little boy was the main character Makoto, and you have been living with Death inside of you for the entire game. The little boy who asked you to sign the contract in the very beginning, and would tell you that the end was coming before every full moon. That little boy was Death living inside of you the whole time. After the main characters murdered the 12 shadows that appeared with every full moon, the spirits of those shadows were able to return to their host, Death, giving him full power. The only reason why Aegis was ever able to stand up to Death was because Yukari's father, Echiro Takiba, blew up the laboratory and split Death into 13 different parts, but now he is whole once again. Aegis still tries to fulfill her purpose as an anti-shadow machine, but in the face of Death at full power, she is easily defeated.
I'm a machine that can't fulfill its purpose. I have no reason to exist. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm so sorry. I'm scared.
For a story that a little while ago made absolutely no sense, this is an amazing plot twist. The plot twist answers almost every mystery the game presents in a satisfying way. The reason why Ryoji was shown to be so fascinated with humans is because he lived through the eyes of Makoto for 10 years. If you remember the beginning of the game, the reason Makoto's persona transforms to single-handedly kill the first full moon boss shadow is because death took over to save your life. The reason why Aigis woke up from hibernation during the beach trip was because she sensed death nearby. The reason why Aigis feels the inexplicable need to protect Makoto is because deep down in her artificial heart, she feels responsible for all the misery that has befallen Makoto since she sealed death inside of him. The main characters end up realizing that Aigis is missing, and Fuka locates her on the bridge. Seize arrives to find Ryoji standing over a broken Aigis. From Ryoji's confrontation with Aigis, he was finally able to get back his memories of who he used to be, and he reveals to Seize that he isn't just the shadow that bears the death arcana. He is something known as the Appriser. The Appriser is like a beacon that signals to the maternal being to come to Earth, and the maternal being is named Nyx, the Mother of Shadows. If Nyx arrives to Earth, then the fall will occur. Every human will succumb to an unending depression and become like those afflicted by apathy syndrome. More than that, every living being on Earth will lose the will to live and perish. Ryoji gives the main characters a choice. They can either fight Nyx even though she's unkillable, or they can kill Ryoji. If they kill Ryoji, they will all forget about personas in the Dark Hour, and Nyx's arrival will be delayed by a few months. They'll be able to live out their days peacefully without having to suffer over the knowledge that every living thing is about to come to an end. The only plot point I believe is a little underexplained is why killing Ryoji doesn't stop the fall, even though his existence is the reason why it began. However, I do have a theory that could explain this. I believe that Nyx was always attracted to the shadows on Earth and was always approaching slowly, and Koitsu Kirijo creating the Appriser sped up Nyx's arrival. Then Ichiro Takiba splitting the Appriser into 13 parts and Aigis sealing death inside of Makoto slowed down Nyx, but she was still coming. Now that 10 years have passed and the Appriser has formed once again, Nyx is going to arrive soon, and because of apathy syndrome, she's gained so much power over the shadows on Earth that if Ryoji does die, she'll just make a new Appriser without Ryoji's personality and the fall will happen just the same. You have until the end of December to decide Ryoji's fate. Ryoji continues to reinforce the idea that Nyx is unkillable and that choosing to let him live is the wrong choice, but of course he's full of crap. Has this guy even watched anime before? Like any good anime protagonist, you need to overcome adversity head-on with the power of friendship, so I let him live. After you let Ryoji live, he tells you that Tartarus serves as a beacon to guide Nyx to Earth, and on January 31st, she will arrive and bring the fall. This brings us to January, the final month of Persona 3, and let me tell you that this has the perfect atmosphere. The music changes from the normal upbeat pop jazz rap to a somber piano melody. I also liked how the number of people with apathy syndrome notably increase. The depressing atmosphere serves to remind you of your limited time. You only have 1 month before the apocalypse, and you have to make every moment count. Something the Persona series excels at is its relevance as a social commentary, and in this way Persona 3 has aged perfectly. In many cities in America, there are hordes of broken homeless people, many of whom are addicted to drugs. In some cities, the drugs are so extreme, people just slouch over while standing up for hours at a time until their posture is permanently in a slouching position. Apathy syndrome reminds me a lot of the worst parts of American cities, in how the hopeless people are just slouched over without any care of reality, just waiting for the end. It's almost like Persona 3 was predicting America's future. But enough about depressing real-life things, we have a robot to date. Aigis' social link becomes available in January, and it's one of the better ones. She more deeply ponders her purpose as an artificial intelligence with emotions, and she tries to understand why anyone should be happy about existing if they all know they're going to die. Aigis trying to find purpose in the face of death parallels your conversation with Ryoji in the class trip, as well as the overall theme of Persona 3, so it's a really good social link to end things on. The more you spend time with Aigis, the more she realizes that her purpose in life is to spend time with the people she cares about, and the person she cares about above all others is the player character Makoto. Okay guys, it's about time I admitted it. Even though my character was already in a relationship with Yukari, I ended up cheating on her with a robot, and honestly, I guess is the better woman. Maybe Persona 3 is predicting the future once again for when men start falling in love with AI sex robots over the next couple of decades. Also, if you convince Junpei to give Chidori white flowers, then Chidori will come back to life towards the end of January. Chidori didn't fully die from reviving Junpei and instead went into a deathly coma, and the life energy she put into maintaining the white flowers Junpei got her went back into her body and revived her. That's a very anime way of coming back to life. This was a really touching moment and a big win for Junpei, although it's bittersweet. On the bright side, Chidori almost dying has made her lose her persona abilities, which means that she doesn't have to take the persona suppressant drugs that were killing her, but consequently she has no memories of being a persona user or of her time with Junpei. With only a few days left in January, it finally hit me. Despite all the game's flaws, I had really grown attached to a lot of the characters and I didn't want to leave them at the end. In my final days, I stopped min-maxing my social links and began to spend more time with the characters I liked the most, because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to see them after Nyx comes. What this really means is I just kept flip-flopping between spending time with Yukari and cheating on her with a robot. This brings us to the end of Persona 3, January 31st. The first thing I want to say is that I really enjoyed the final Tartarus environment. It's fitting that at the end of this 250 plus story building is a futuristic white city, almost like it was built for the arrival of the new king. On the way to the top, we fight Jin and Takaya one last time. Too bad for Takaya that we don't fight him in a cutscene, because then we'd all just stand around and watch him shoot us without using our powers. Jin ends up getting killed by shadows, and because of the power of friendship, we choose not to kill Takaya after defeating him, and for some reason, we don't even tie him up or take away his gun. That just seems stupid. This brings us to the final boss of Persona 3, Nyx Avatar. This avatar is Ryoji after he merged back into Nyx, and I quite like Ryoji as a villain. There seems to be a shred of empathy as he fights, almost like a part of him remembers that he still cares about his friends, but he also sees the death of humanity as an inevitability that isn't worth fighting against. As you hit him, he'll say things like impossible, because he's surprised that a human would even try to stand against pure despair. I also really liked this boss's design. He looks as if the end of the world was personified in the form of a giant angel of death, which is pretty on point. Interestingly enough, at the beginning of this fight, Nyx Avatar says, "The moment man devoured the fruit of knowledge, he sealed his fate," which implies that some of the book of Genesis from the Bible is canon to the Persona universe. Is generational sin the reason why evil gods try to destroy the earth in every game? On another note, I absolutely adore the music in this fight. It blends metal guitar riffs with piano, a hard beat, and the Velvet Room opera singing in a way that just works surprisingly well. I'll have this song on repeat for a while after I beat this game. When it comes to mechanics, I like the idea of this fight. Every time the boss's health reaches 0, he switches arcanas, and each arcana has a new set of weaknesses and resistances and abilities that you need to learn on the fly. Every time he switches arcana, he says,
"The arcana is the means by which all is revealed,"
which I found kind of hilarious after the 8th time. Unfortunately, there's one really big problem with the final boss. It's way too easy. Ryoji hyped up this boss by saying it was impossible to beat Nyx, so I wanted a mechanically challenging boss, and it's just not. I found the Reaper, who's an enemy that attacks players that stand still for too long in Tartarus, to be much harder. It's kind of disappointing that the Mother of Shadows can't outdo the Reaper, who you can fight at level 1. Either way, after defeating all the arcana of the Nyx Avatar, the moon cracks open because, surprise, Nyx was inside of the moon the whole time. Remember when I said Persona 3 is like Majora's Mask even though it isn't about a moon crashing into Earth? I was lying. After Nyx reveals herself, all of the humans who were trapped inside of coffins are now able to walk around the Dark Hour freely. People with despair in their hearts start turning into shadows immediately and begin to murder people. As Nyx comes to Earth, the pressure on top of Tartarus increases and no one is able to stand up. Makoto's consciousness fades from the pressure and he enters the Velvet Room. Igor tells you that the strength of your social bonds determine your potential, then every person whose social link you maxed out reaches out to you. With the power of love and friendship, the bonds of your friends grant you the Universe Tarot card. This gives you the power you need to stand against Nyx and fight her by yourself. This leads to the second phase of the boss against the Nyx core. The song here is another banger, as they remix the old game's OP Burn My Dread into a boss song. Although the song's great, mechanically this boss has no mechanics. You just auto-win after 3 hits. I was hoping you'd have to use your collection of Persona to hit different weaknesses as the Nyx core changes arcana, similar to the Persona 5 tournament that you do in the Casino Palace, where you fight a series of enemies by yourself. And that would have been really mechanically fun, but no, you just use your universe card to one-shot Nyx, and then it's over. For such a hyped up encounter, it does stink that the mechanics do not reflect the narrative. I get that canonically Nyx would have one-shot everyone because they couldn't move and that it was Makoto's universe card that stopped her, but I wish the boss's 2 phases were both a lot harder to make me feel like I'm fighting an impossibly difficult opponent through the mechanics. With Nyx defeated, peace comes back to the lands, Tartarus dissolves, and Makoto returns to his friends. There is a time skip to the day before graduation on March 4th, and all the main characters have forgotten about their personas, the Dark Hour, and that they saved the world. The only person who remembers is Aigis, but she stopped hanging out with the main characters and just awkwardly stares at Makoto from afar. After school, you enter the Epilogue where you can talk to every social link that you maxed out, or talk to someone who knows them. I really enjoyed this as a way of knowing how you impacted the lives of those around you. When talking to your girlfriend, which for me was Yukari, you even make plans to be together in the future. The epilogue would be pretty awkward if you romanced all of them and said yes to being with all of them in the future. For some reason I didn't understand, every social link says you look really sick or tired, which was kinda weird. The next day you wake up to Aigis knocking on your door. You end up telling Aigis that you also still have memories of beating Nyx, and you both head off to school. During Mitsuru's graduation speech, she starts to talk about the death of her father, and then suddenly she and every other member of SEAS remember that they battled Nyx. Mitsuru jumps off of the stage mid-speech and runs out with the other members. Before your final battle, all of the members of SEAS promise to meet up with each other after they beat Nyx, and during this cutscene they all start running to the spot that they promised to meet up at. In the next scene, we see Makoto lying on Aigis' lap. Aigis explains how she finally figured out her purpose in life, as well as what it means to live. She explains how when she saw you leave to fight the final boss by yourself, she thought about how she might never see you again, and in that moment she realized that she cares more about you than anything else, and wants to protect you until the end of time. Through Makoto, Aigis realizes that protecting the people she cares about is what gives life meaning. You don't need some grand purpose to live, and just caring about your friends on a daily basis is enough. Aigis starts to cry, and Makoto weakly brushes her cheek before lowering his arm. It was about here that I realized what was happening. Every social link said you looked tired, and Makoto was barely able to lift his hand to comfort Aigis. Makoto is dying. He used all of his strength to seal away Nyx, which only left him with a few months left to live. Makoto struggles to cling on to life so that he can spend more time with Aigis, and right before his friends can reach him to say their final goodbyes, Makoto closes his eyes for the very last time. Although Makoto is the main character, Aigis is the heart of Persona 3's narrative. She's an artificial life that's trying to find out the purpose behind existence in the face of death, and just like many humans, she's only able to understand what's truly important in life as it's ripped away from her. There's a lot to unpack regarding the impact of this ending scene. Firstly, I figured out that Makoto was going to die about halfway through the game, and it deeply upset me because I hate getting things spoiled. I thought, in a game about finding purpose in the face of death, where you summon your persona by shooting yourself in the head, of course the main character is going to die. I thought it was a bad thing that the foreshadowing was so heavy-handed, but then in the game's final moments, I realized that that's the point. I'm supposed to know I'm going to die. Throughout the entire game, I am approaching my destined end, and it's up to me to find purpose in that. Persona 3 offers this question to the player. If you only had 1 year left to live, what things will stand out as most important by the end? Is it your achievements in battle? Was it acing every exam? Was it grinding your social stats? Of course not. The thing that stands out to me as the most important were the friendships I made along the way. At first I didn't understand why the ending of Persona 3 made me feel so sad. After all, Makoto is just a silent protagonist, so why am I getting so emotional from his death? Then it hit me. The reason why the ending of Persona 3 makes me feel so sad isn't because Makoto dies. It's because I can't spend any more time with the people I've grown to care about, and I'm upset that they'll have to live their life with the pain of losing a friend. I promised Yukari that we would have a future together, and now she'll never have that. Makoto won't be able to spend any more time with the love of his life because he sacrificed himself so that others could live. Please ignore the fact that I cheated on her with the robot. If Persona 5 is the game about stealing hearts, then why is it that the ending of Persona 3 made me feel like my heart had been ripped out of its chest? When I first beat Persona 3, I was filled with an intense longing for more, but not for more game. Honestly, I was pretty bored of clearing Tartarus floors and the slow plot progression. When Makoto died, I wanted so desperately for him to get back up because I wanted more time to spend with the people I cared about. Persona 3 uses its social link gameplay mechanic in the most ingenious way in the entire series. I said in the introduction that I love it when gameplay mechanics work in tandem with the story to create a masterful experience, and Persona 3's story about finding purpose in the face of death blends perfectly with the social link and calendar system gameplay mechanics to create one of the best moments of any video game ever. The social links and story combine to teach you that the meaning of life isn't money or some grand destination, it's the friendships and loved ones you made along the way. The reason why Persona 3 teaches you this life lesson better than any other artistic medium is because it's a video game. If I'm told through a movie's characters that the point of life is the friendships you make along the way, it's in one ear and out the other. But in Persona 3, I'm the one in control of Makoto's last year of life. I choose what's important. I choose what friends to prioritize. I'm in control of a year of life, and in the end, I'm the one who realized that I wanted Makoto's life to continue for just one more day so that I could spend more time with the people that I care about. For some people, it takes facing death in real life to understand what is truly valuable in life, and Persona 3 lets you do that in a life simulator. I have no idea what happens in the Answer DLC because it isn't out yet, but if it brings back Makoto, I'll be very disappointed. The ending of Persona 3 is powerful because it's your last year, and I don't want them to change that. Persona 3 uses its life simulator gameplay loop to teach players the most valuable lesson about life that there is, and that's why Persona 3 is a masterpiece. If you ignore that the only dungeon Tartarus is boring, and how combat is broken and too easy, and how nothing happens in the first 40 hours of the plot, and all the plot holes, and the terrible villain motivations for enacting the plot, and, well, I can't just ignore all of that and call the game a masterpiece. There's probably a lot of people who would have loved this analysis of the meaning behind Persona 3's ending who will never watch it because they couldn't make it past all the negativity about their favorite game, and that's a shame. It should be clear by now that I have never been more conflicted over a game than I am with Persona 3. When I finished the game, I had no idea what to title this video because I had no clear stance. I even questioned not making the video at all because it seemed too hard to talk about. Is Persona 3 a once-in-a-lifetime masterpiece? Well, the ending certainly is. Does Persona 3 have a great cast of characters? Yes. Does Persona 3 have a poorly paced story with a myriad of plot holes? Also, yes. Does the music go hard? Of course, I'm listening to it as I make this video. Is the gameplay fun? Well, it's flashy and stylish, but overall Tartarus is more mind-numbing than fun, and the difficulty is very poorly balanced. If there's so much wrong with Persona 3, then why did I love it so much? It took me writing this 30-plus page essay to finally realize my true feelings on Persona 3. Persona 3 Reload is one of the most impactful games I have ever played, and has left a bigger impact on me than any other Persona game, but it's no masterpiece. And overall, Persona 3 is the worst Persona game out of the last 3 releases. This sentence may appear almost contradictory in nature, but it's how I truly feel. I don't think that a tiny sliver of Persona 3's long runtime being a masterpiece with a powerful message can make up for the fact that the vast majority of the game is largely flawed, but I can say that its amazing ending has certainly left a powerful impact on my heart. Because of this game's great cast and powerful ending, a part of me wanted to title this video something like, almost a masterpiece, but I couldn't because it's not true. It's not like the plot was almost paced well or Tartarus was almost a good dungeon. They were both extremely far off from being considered good. The vast majority of the game was very far off of being considered a masterpiece. The game would need to be completely restructured and reimagined to be close to on par with Persona 5. However, I'll also say that when I began to replay Persona 5 for footage, I couldn't stop myself from deeply missing the great characters from Persona 3. Because of the characters and powerful ending, Persona 3 will continue to live on as the Persona game I miss the most in my memories, yet it's also the Persona game I least want to replay.